Yeah, good afternoon, Brain Trust. This is Tony Vicente. I'm Chief Alchemist at +1EXP. I don't know why I just said that. That's not how we start things. The first part I know exactly why I said, the at +1EXP. I'm the Chief Alchemist here at +1EXP, which is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard, and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and desire is to help amazing designers find great players who love their games and help amazing players find great designers whose games they can love. We do that in a lot of different ways, but my favorite way is actually just sitting down with a designer whose work I love and talking to them about that work. It seems weird to not have talked to today's guest until this point, but I'm excited to do it either way. We've got Adam Vass with us. Adam, why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, where they can find you online?
Sure. My name is Adam Vass. I have been making tabletop games since 2016 as World Champ Game Co. My website is worldchamp.io, where you can find all my games in print and links to everything else. I'm on Twitter at WCGameCo. My digital games are at worldchampgameco.itch.io. And I make near monthly games at patreon.com/worldchampgameco. And I'm currently on Kickstarter with a game called Soul Burner, and the project is available at www.dying.day.
That's so good. So good. We loves us a good vanity URL.
Truly.
Why don't you, we're going to talk a lot about the rest of your work, but since it's live right now, why don't you tell people about what they're going to find when they go to dying.day?
Soulburner is a standalone RPG that brings the dark fantasy aesthetic of Morkborg and the D20 sort of familiar traditional role-playing stuff of that style of game with my more lofty, weird, ethereal, memory-based role-playing, such as my stoner fantasy game, Necronautus. And it sort of brings some of these emergent storytelling systems and alternative conflict resolution methods from Necronautus and bridges the gap into more traditional dark fantasy with Morkborg as this hybrid that is hopefully more than the sum of its parts. It's body horror, it's revenge horror, it's power fantasy, it's having your ex be your leg and your sword be your face. And it's just gonzo weirdness in a fantasy package that I think only really I could or would want to come up with.
I love it. Yeah. So if I want my tongue to become a sword and I want to stab somebody with it, I can do that. And that's a really important thing to know in any game is, can I do that? And so I'm super excited to talk about it more. I do want to dive into a ton of stuff about your work. For people who are not familiar, though, it seems weird if this is not your first time tuning in that you wouldn't know this. I'm a huge fan of Adam's work. I have been a patron for a long time. I think I first came across your work, Adam, with the Tome Kickstarter, I think, was the first time I saw you. I was living in Seattle. I wasn't even in Philadelphia. I had not designed an RPG at that point in time. I just played a whole lot of them, and I backed it, and I got it, and it was beautiful. And then as I started getting more and more into stuff, I quickly discovered the rest of your work as it was starting to emerge, and have been very excited to follow what you've been doing since a bit back. And so if y'all are watching right now, if you have questions in the chat, feel free to drop them in as we're going. Feel free to get as specific as you want about any of Adam's work. We are going to talk about Soulburner a lot, but there's enough there that if you've got a question, I would love to give you the opportunity as viewers to just pick Adam's brain. One of the things we are going to address, two things we're going to address right off the top, though, before we even talk about how you got started in RPGs. When you think about this is a chain I'm going to press on my face, what are the number one qualities about that chain you take into account?
I think the size of the chain link itself is important. I think smaller is going to give you some more detail from your face that survives through, and more coarse, you end up losing some of the curvature of your face as it can't really bend around like your temples and stuff. And weight is another very important one, because the chains I typically wrap around my face are quite heavy. The best photos I can take are of me laying down and letting the chain kind of drape rather than full tight wrap because I can't hold my head up.
So what is the ideal chain? We can just show it with your fingers also, so that we don't have any sense of scale. What's the best chain link size?
Yeah, about an inch and a half, I would say. If you're looking at more than 2 inches, I think you're going to have a bad time.
Awesome. Very, very important things. Alfred Valley in the chat says, Morkborg, a spiked flail to the face, soul burner, you get to be the flail.
Spiked flail is your face, yeah.
If we say chain face 3 times in the bathroom in the dark, chain face will hit you up on SMS. It's true. No, like I said, so that was one. And then the other question, and it's a question we've been asked on stream before, but you are here to answer it now. Okay. What is the Brain Trust?
The Brain Trust is a lot of things. It is primarily a design partnership between me and Will Jobst. We started the Brain Trust as a Kickstarter project in which we made a game from scratch with our backers voting on what decisions we were making. And while we made the Brain Trust duo, we simultaneously made the Brain Trust podcast, which was a way for us to collaborate in a public way and share those design ideas that we were having. And we made the Brain Trust Discord server, which at the time was primarily for people to follow along with that game development, but over time became its own game design community on the internet. So the Brain Trust is both, it is Will and myself. It is the podcast stream, which includes other people. And then there's the Discord server, which includes a lot of people. So it is a community and an art project in itself. It's very quantum.
I think we need a compatibility marker like Children of the Trust, because like it's really funny. Like lots of the people you see on stream over the course of the last year, a lot of them are not, but a lot of the people who we spend a lot of time streaming with here are people I met through the Brain Trust, right? So people like Keegan, people like Aaron, Spencer Campbell, Tyler, any number of people that we have here on stream regularly or off and on are people who I've met through the Brain Trust. It's a very it's one of the most welcoming communities I think that is out there in the game space. In the way that weird digital parasocial communities can be, is very caring for whatever that means for an online digital community. It's been very meaningful for me over the last year to engage people in the Brain Trust and have a community of support there. So I'm very appreciative of the wider scope of that. I also love the Brain Trust podcast. It's a super fun way to just kind of dive in and get a sense of both you and Will's design proclivities. And y'all recently did just a bunch of really amazing episodes. The March Madness one, especially anybody else who doesn't know, this next bit's all improv. None of this actually happened. Because it's an inside joke, but I'm going to let everybody in on the joke, so there's nothing to go looking for any of this later. Let's talk about the March Madness bracket. You and Will competed every single game you ever designed, because you guys design a game kind of on air pretty much every single time. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's most of a game. But you guys put them all in a March Madness style bracket against each other. I just got to ask, like, what was the dark horse design, that you were really surprised made it as far as it did?
A low seed was the game that Will and I designed. It was a fantasy, traditional role-playing game where you start off in a jail and you have to escape. But the two players are simultaneously the player character and GM together, and you just alternate words. So I would say and Will would go prison, and I would go door. No one really expected that to go very far because it is not smooth to play, but it is very fun.
And then I think one of the biggest upsets was the when this Discord has Ghost in it made it to the semifinals, and then it got totally airbutted by the game it was up against. Tell us a little bit about that moment.
Yeah, I think everyone kind of thought this Discord has Ghost and it would go all the way. Will and I won the IGDN Most Innovative Award for the game last year, and it easily has surpassed every other game we've made and published in terms of attention. but it was shockingly surpassed by the open world RPG, which is similarly a game that you play with your friends on the internet, but it is beyond slice of life. It's almost just like removed. It is the hyper normal RPG where you're in a car with your friends driving somewhere and just looking out the window, and someone's picking songs to listen to over the stereo, and you play over Google Street View and you use YouTube links and just have a great time. Our sort of quarantine escapist game that brought back these memories of driving on country roads and making up stories about the things that you see.
Yeah.
In terms of pure fun and pure ease of access, I think that one just snuck by. Discord has ghosts in it.
Yeah, it was, like I said, it was a real Airbud moment, because at one point, somebody came out in the court and they were like, "You can't put a car in an RPG," and then they looked inside the rule book, and there was nothing that said you couldn't put a car in an RPG, and so you were allowed to drive on the roads and play that game, and it was just a real shocker, I think, to everybody at that moment.
Yeah, the ghosts were quite upset that they didn't bring cars into their haunted house.
Yeah. And then, we had the final showdown with that game, and, it went into triple overtime. Tell us about the final moments of that game against their ultimate opponent.
Yeah, we did an episode on destructive media and destructive zines, and there was a game that didn't see the light of print, but it was called Total Station, and it involved stapling layers of maps together and tearing away portions of the map to reveal what's underneath as you create this history and fictional world through its archaeology and through its exploration. And I think, it was toe-to-toe. Would you rather have this mundane but fun experience in the real world, or try to craft a better one from scratch and go through the layers of dirt and stone and try to find and create the history of your utopia? And I think, it was down to the wire. It was a really close match, but open world kind of sneaked out in terms of, again, accessibility. It's hard to wrap your mind around discovering these paleontological artifacts, and it's much easier to find a really old Dairy Queen in Omaha, Nebraska. That just cinched it. The Dairy Queen was a moment I think we all remember.
Yeah. Which is great because they've come in as sponsors for next year's March Madness event now. They're going to have to close more Dairy Queens in order to make that happen funding wise, but I'm really excited to see it. I'm a huge fan of when they flip a blizzard upside down and it doesn't fall out. It's just,
I want to gamify that next year.
I think in all honesty, this is, I think, the best way to give anybody who hasn't watched this before a sense of a little bit about what emerges, both between you and Will and the brain trust, but also some of the way that you think about design also too. So anybody who tuned in after I said that was a bit, that was all part of a bit. Those are all real design conversations that y'all had over on the brain trust. But the March Madness thing may or may not have happened. So go subscribe to Adam's Patreon to find out if it did or it did not. Let's talk a little bit about before you got into design explicitly. Let's just talk about how you got started playing RPGs. What was kind of your entry point into the hobby?
I think I was relatively late in terms of my age or the scene, I guess, because I didn't play any growing up. I wasn't a fantasy head, anything like that. I had moved from Boston back to Grand Rapids, Michigan in 2015, and there's a comic shop here called the Vault of Midnight, and back then they would do pretty frequent game nights and events around town. And there was an annual event called Dungeons and Dark Arts, which would take place in a brewery in town that used to be a church. So there's these tall stained glass windows and ale and like artisanal wooden tables and stuff. And, every January people would come play Dungeons and Dragons and learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And the event always sold out, and it was always like on some level hard to access. There's only so many tables, there's so many game masters. And I went, it must have been in 2016. I went and lucked out and got brought into a table. They were full, but they let me in anyway, and I played Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 and had a great time storming a pirate ship. I in sort of a nod to Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, squeezed the ship captain's head so much that his eyeball bulged out at the audience. And that was the moment specifically for me of like, I can do anything. Like, sure, this is a rigid tactical experience because it was 3.5, but there's still this level of creativity and lawlessness that goes into it that was really inspiring to me. And I went from that very quickly into playing 5th edition and then playing PBTA games. The other boon of being close with and being close to the Vault of Midnight was that I would get to play all kinds of games and check stuff out. Like, air quotes, helping the staff do research. What games they would want to keep in stock and what games, how they could market them to their customers and stuff. But I would just get to play stuff. So I had this wealth of knowledge at my feet and access to this library that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford. And very quickly got from the mainstream to the indie in a way that I tend to do with the things I care about. So that was in January 2016, and I was publishing games by the beginning of 2017. I think was my first strategy game, and summer of 2017 was my first role-playing game publishing.
That's awesome. So what made you decide? What made you decide you wanted to kind of make that leap from the design of play, right? What we do around the table, to actually designing a game?
I think I really like and sort of hyper fixate on how the things I like work and why I like them. And very naturally that creates a bridge to how I could make something I like better or more unique or more for my particular desires. So, and I think this is a journey a lot of game designers have, of playing Dungeons and Dragons, having a good enough time, but realizing it's not perfect and it doesn't quite do the exact experience that you want it to do. And it's not terribly hard if you're bored enough to create something that does do exactly what you want it to do. And, my close friends think in ways similar to me or like media that's similar to the stuff I like. So they're going to enjoy those twists that I can put on an existing thing. And that sort of encouragement and that cycle of, this is good, but what could we do to make it better? Or what could we do to make it more me or us, continues to the extent that I get something a couple years later, like Soulburner or Cyber Metal, that's just the most me possible. At least I think now that it is. And it's hard to picture a future 4 years from now where I look back on these and think of how timid they were. I always just like to push to some logical end the idea that I can improve on this thing to get some sort of perfect engagement from myself in terms of design. And if I can share that with people playing it, or other designers who think something is clever and they want to lift it, or anything, like any kind of external validation is bonus to that intrinsic validation that's just creating something cool.
Awesome. And like, there's you mentioned something I think is such a huge kind of touchstone of like the way that you tend to move to like an indie space and anything that you kind of love and are passionate about, which I think is such it's such an interesting touchstone. I also like, you are like before everything that's happened over the course of the last couple of years, traveling and touring musician, right? Somebody who's out there doing a lot of creative work. You do a lot of the art for your games, and most of the art for your games. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've seen games of yours that don't have your art, though. That may be the case sometimes.
Right.
And so, but there's a huge collaborative influence in what you do also too. And I think, like, I'm curious how those two kind of things maybe interplay with each other. Like I feel it's not that like Wizards of the Coast doesn't have a huge number of collaborators in the sense of there's a lot of people who work on those projects to make them a reality.
Right.
whether ostensibly those people are collaborators, because I think collaboration requires equity. And that requires people to be willing to say, hey, like, this is ours, not just mine, and I'm going to let you work on it some also too, which is interesting, which is a thing sometimes, but also I think in the indie spaces we see a lot more of that collaboration. We see a lot less of the personalities that come up. That we certainly all have our personalities that block the type of true collaboration that kind of opens things up. But I also know you're like a huge fan of the horror genre also too, and in a lot of ways, a lot of the more kind of niche things within that and indie spaces within those pieces also. Do you see a connection between the way that you kind of approach collaboration across all of those things, as well as kind of your draw to the indie space, or is that something that I'm just like,
no, yeah, I think that's pretty spot on. I think that comes back to being a teenager and playing music, and not just the collaboration that is being in a band, being one component part to a machine, but the idea that multiple bands make up a scene or a community, and you also have those people who are maybe not as musically inclined, but they're still part of the scene, whether it's just someone who's a supportive fan, or someone who will draw the t-shirts and printmaking or whatever, people who book the shows. There's always a large list of people who make creative things happen. And I think that's come from all of the sort of niche culture stuff that I've been a part of since I was younger. I definitely feel it in the game space, especially again in the brain trust, and exceptionally with someone like Will, who I collaborate with frequently. But I think there's a lot to say, it does a lot for me to have someone with a different experience or a different perspective, but with a similar care or a similar excitement or fire for something conceptually. Because when Will and I design games, Will and I like different games pretty frequently, and we design very different games, but when we work together, it's more than the sum of its parts. We really feed off of one another's excitement and ideas and come up with something that neither one of us would have been able to come with on our own. And I think that is the most like point-atable example of this, because even Necronautus comes from this sort of internal collaboration, or I talked a lot about curation as art, of taking warp riders by the sword and visualizing it instead of just hearing it, and like being in a desert with 3 witches or whatever, like taking that, and then how that became Necronautus through my lenses of what I like about games, and using systems that, like, I was really inspired by the Wizards and the Wastes by Bats, and like just pouring all these things together. So they were passive collaborating. The sword doesn't know probably anything about me or my games, but they had a massive part in curating the aesthetic and the setting of this thing. So that's all to say, inspiration and curation is like passive collaboration to me, but active collaboration really just like consumes that, or like fuels that fire within me to create things that I'm constantly innovating with other people who are innovating on my own thought. Even a failure of mine to communicate that's misinterpreted, the idea that I write a rule in a book that's not necessarily well written, and a play group interprets that in a particular way and has a particular experience, and I can hear about it, which, you know, hopefully they'll tell me, is amazing and super cool. That is an active collaboration. I wasn't there. The cycle, it completes itself when I do find out about those sort of things, or if it is something that I can experience. But yeah, I think through and through, what we do as game designers and games publishers is foster collaboration. The act of play is collaboration. So that is my number one thing too, I think, in terms of creative satisfaction. Like writing music, composing, and making the songs is my favorite part of being in a band. Whereas iteration and performance is secondary to the feeling that is that sort of ethereal, almost spiritual connective collaboration. And I get that in games, even the games that I'm publishing and writing on my own, because I don't exist in a vacuum, and I can take inspiration from or be motivated by conversations with other like-minded people. Not even like-minded, just like other people.
Yeah, you are somebody who I think a lot of times from our conversations with each other just via chat and in person, or in person as it is in today's day and age on the internet, right? A lot of what will influence your games is thinking about play state, specifically like the book itself. When you talk about the book and the design, the visual aesthetics, the layout, a lot of those things are very true. But whenever you have sent me like a game that isn't done that I'm going to run on stream, all of a sudden, like you're like, I want people to be able to say this kind of things, right? So there's this very interesting transition I've seen, like when you're designing the book, you're very conscious of product, the visual aesthetics, the layout, but a lot of that actually starts with, I want people to say these kind of things while they're playing this game. And I love that. Like I'm somebody who, you know, my very first design was very, in a similar but different way to Necronautus, very much like anything is a skill. You tell me the word your skill is, use wordplay, interpret it broadly, like go nuts with it. I want that kind of intentionality behind you choosing your skills that no pick list is ever going to give you. So 0 skills or infinite skills. That's the space I like to play in. But I've really loved that. That's such a consideration for you. Like I know for me as a creator, like lots of times I think about, not that you don't, but like the primary thing is like, what do I want people to experience as they're playing this game? Like what's the narrative reality I want them to experience? And I love that for you, it is so linguistically based. And I feel like that's to a certain degree, like as you were talking about, writing songs is such an important part for you. Like that's in some ways it's the same statement. Like you're excited to be able to say, we're going to get up and play this, and this is the thing we're going to say or do or perform together, and it's creating kind of the base for that. Both of which are experiences of play, like in different ways, right? But I love that as like a very nuanced reality for your design space, like, and I think it just comes across tremendously. I think, you know, you have some other examples of this, but right now, especially in connection with Soulburner, like Necronautus does that incredibly well. For people who aren't familiar with the game, give us kind of the elevator pitch about Necronautus, what it is, and kind of how, like, what you wanted people to say, play, and experience during that.
Yeah. Necronautus is a stoner metal science fantasy in an afterlife that is a universe. So everything that's ever died in any space exists in this sort of planet hopping death realm. And you play as death agents, which are souls trapped in clouds of noxious gas that go between planets in service of the god death to do missions. So you've been stripped of your sort of singular identity in service of this agency, and you thusly use words of power to overcome all of your conflicts. And those words of power kind of constantly manipulate, both based on the fictional circumstance of where you are and what you're interacting with, and this meta circumstance of what does this word mean to you in this moment, or how can you interpret it to get the advantage that you're seeking. So in the narrative, you know, you're these characters that are formless and can be anything, but are only really limited by your imagination. And that's reflected with how the mechanics work and how you're able to overcome challenge in the game. And as you continue to use the words, they sort of change, and there's this wordplay, letter play thing involved, in addition to you unlocking memories of who you were before you became a death agent. And you're able to sort of channel those memories in a similar way to how you use the language that you're constantly developing. And over the course of play, you either sort of double down as an agent and become a very powerful agent, or you sort of start to pursue this lost sense of self and rediscover a purpose outside of the agency. And so it has all this really weird gonzo silliness to it, and extreme action and weirdness, mixed with this like self-reflective sincerity that I think a lot of my games try to balance similar things of like philosophical or introspective themes with balls to the wall action gameplay to varying different distinctions of weight. Some games are more one thing than the other, but I think almost every game I make wants to be some decisive balance between those ideals.
Yeah. And I feel memory is a big theme for you also. Like we talked a little about language being a big theme, but memory is something you come back to a lot within your games at different points in time.
Yeah.
Like, is that something that like, what about memory? Like, obviously it's a great way for, I mean, like it could be, there's just the technique of this is how we reveal a character slowly over time, which I think,
right.
But it's such a core part of your design ethos that it feels very personal. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. When I started Necronautus, I think a lot of that impetus was examining my own faulty memory and things that I would struggle to remember or things that I can remember that feel like they don't serve me. And that was an exploration and a gamification of just wondering about that, not necessarily making statements about it. I also think, like you said, it's a great narrative device. I think of stuff like Lost, the TV show, where you're experiencing the things that are on the island currently, and every character has these flashbacks, and you get to learn more about who they are and why they act in certain ways based on their past. And I think, again, this also gamifying it subverts this expectation of writing or pre-writing or creating a backstory that maybe doesn't serve you during play, which is a very common thing in more traditional like fantasy role playing. This brings it to the table and makes it part of the game that everyone can engage with, and it's constantly changing. It's not rigid, and it's not just ink in your notebook. It's part of the gameplay experience. So there's a lot of motivations for using it. I do think too, in just sort of a philosophical way, that is the only thing that makes a character. I don't think ability scores are reflective of who a character is. They are instead a belt of tools with which you overcome your obstacles. But who you are is always the sum of the component memories of who you were and how you got here, both in narrative, in fiction and in reality.
Which wasn't intentional when we started this thread. It really just came to me, but it's also a great intro into Soul Burner.
Yeah.
So in Soul Burner, you're dead. And yes. You're back again. It's a Necronautus Morkborg mashup, which I mean, even from an aesthetic standpoint, like I immediately scream yes, because I'm very excited to see would have been excited to see your take on Morkborg
right
layout and stuff, but because they are so complementary, but still distinctively nuanced, I'm so excited to see the book when it's finally out. You've died. And you don't know all the things about your past. Tell us a little bit about like how that memory theme comes in as we're talking about Soul Burner.
Yeah. So in Necronautus, the memories are almost a secondary system to language because they're multiple things I wanted to explore. And in Soul Burner, I've kind of minimized the lingual aspect. It always exists, and that's sort of the nature of writing and game design as text. But I really wanted to double down on this idea that you are your memories and you are composed of these pivotal moments in your personal history or your social history, even the like region's history, and the idea that even as you continue to adventure, you're creating new memories and these bullet points that are continuing to change you and who you are, what you want, and how you're going to get there. So by, again, in a way that mirrors the Necronautus gas cloud, you play as ashen heaps. So somebody who was burnt and death just didn't take you. So your soul is in this heap of ash, and you kind of have the approximation of a form of body form, but every time you roll dice, that form is going to change. So you have these pieces of you that are called reminders that are effectively your limbs, your extremities, the things that you use to overcome your challenges that are reflective of your past experiences. And those past experiences are either randomized using the book and cards and dice and stuff, or just kind of come up with. And in a similar way to Necronautus, you have one very profound memory, which is the moment of your death. So in Soulburner, you're kind of working backwards in a sort of Christopher Nolan Memento style, adding pieces to this story and trying to figure out what happened, in addition to adding pieces to your present story, this undeath that you're experiencing, and moving in two narrative directions at the same time. Of course, these memories manifest physically through your ashen heap. So you sprout limbs, an arm doesn't have to be an arm, and a lot of them are going to be weapons because it is dark fantasy and weird. So I often picture just like someone who's made of nails, or someone whose head is a flail just on a chain dangling there. But in addition, you have memories of, love and sadness and anything on the emotional spectrum, and how they can be diluted into sort of a physical structure, whether it be like a face that exists here. It could just be like a living scream that is growing out of your back, and like that's just part of you, as part of who you are. In addition to it being awesome and in metal and weird, it gives you a new tool that you can use to overcome obstacles in the game. And it is this continued idea of memories manifesting, of your body being a collection of not just trauma, but everything that's happened to you, good or bad. And yeah, the dice rolling sort of affects that. Those things change. They become more specific. They become more or less powerful in the same way that your skills would change as you play through a traditional game. And when you hit a critical, they also can explode. And they have an intense moment, like an extra impact, something that, like you would on a crit, you do extra damage, or you have some extremely almost unaccountable success. And it is removed from you physically, and in its place grows the memory that you incurred by using it, right? These critical moments in games, you, as a player, when you roll a natural 20 and you want that moment, like in Soulburner, that moment becomes physically part of your character. And if I used my flail head to knock over, this wooden horse that's full of goblins or something, I might just have a wooden horse head now, because that is the manifestation of this current thing that I'm experiencing, that literally replaces in the game this past memory, but also is indicative of you continuing your journey and collecting new memories, and how that also is this sort of meta thing of like, as you continue to live, it can become harder to remember certain past experience. Like you have a bigger library of past experiences to choose from, which also sometimes makes it harder to find what you're looking for. So the game kind of plays again with what memory is to you as a player, and how it is reflected within your character's build, and how that affects what you as a player can do to change your circumstances.
Love it. I would love to see it. This is for anybody out there. I would love to see people playing almost back and forth between a Soulburner campaign and a Morkborg campaign of those characters before they die. But I would love to do it just like out of sequence time wise, like start with whichever one you want and just go back and forth. I think starting with Soulburner is actually best, establishing a couple of memories and just saying in Morkborg, whenever those memories come up, like you can just say, this is that memory, and just dictate, here's how that's going to unfold for a little bit, and then just pass it back out to a normal one and go back and forth. I think would be a tremendously cool way to watch this happen, because I love it as a group of people who died in some sort of whatever activity, just then unpacking those things in the history of their lives after the fact. I think there's just so much, as a standalone game, tremendous. I think throwing it up against something like Morkborg, the ability to kind of go back and forth and play with some of those things would be a tremendously fun experience to explore also too.
Yeah. That was certainly some of the intent by making it standalone and compatible, is that it's a game, like most of my games are standalone and all, in one piece, because I don't ever like the idea that you bought something and it feels incomplete or that you need more. That's just frustrating to me as a consumer, and it is dangerous to me as a collector. But in addition to that, I do want this cross play to be able to happen with Morkborg, whether it be, if you had a regular Morkborg game, one player could just play the Ashen Heap. Like there is this, you could sort of treat it like a class in a group of other Morkborg players and not necessarily alienate or isolate anybody, because it works close enough to the same.
Right.
And obviously there's the massive wealth of stuff available for Morkborg in terms of adventures and monsters and all that you could just easily throw at Soulburner 2 and add them to your weird collection of memories that you're going to incur. But yeah, it does really excite me what people can do or will do in terms of further crossing the streams between these two systems and games.
And like I would love to just remind chat, we're gonna transition a little bit. You should go check this out at dying.day. Right now it's live. If you haven't backed it yet, go check it out. Go share it with folks if you already have backed it. Let them know that it exists, that it's out there. I'm super excited about all the different things you've been doing lately, from Cyber Metal to Necronautus. Also the way that you've been doing more and more crossover that makes me feel like I can just enter into the Adam Vass World Champ Game Co. cinematic universe and explore around and move from system to system to system. We just know, like, hey, this is going to happen. Like I could hop into Scratch and Claw for a little while and then hop back out. I think Necronautus as a tool makes it really easy to zoom in, zoom out on different spaces. But for people who aren't familiar, even though Soulburner is not part of this, I would love to talk for a little bit about darts. Just reminding people, if there's a game you want to ask Adam a question about, we've got about 15 minutes left. Would love to bring your questions up. It can be Soulburner related. It can be any game related. From anything that Adam's done, but I would love to talk about darts a little bit, because I love what darts is. It was connected to Cyber Metal 2012, which was your last project, but it's something that that actually is the World Champ Game Co. cinematic universe. Tell us a little bit about darts.
So darts is an acronym that stands for the Death Agent Role-Playing Timeline Series, and it is based on this idea that a band in the 80s called Death Agent, which is of course the character class in Necronautus that ties this further together. This metal band was so big that culture and history kind of warped around them, sort of in like a Metalocalypse style. They're bigger than what the biggest band could be. And in this alternate history, it sort of actualizes the satanic panic, that they were using backmasking and playing records backwards to do these rituals and like communing with the devil and doing all this stuff that metal bands in the 70s and 80s were only rumored to be doing in our reality. And that culminates with them sacrificing Ronald Reagan on stage in 1986 and beginning a war between the forces of hell and the agents of the American military. And that taking place in the mid 80s and starting to set games in the early aughts in 2012 with Cyber Metal. And then Y2K is the sort of prequel adventure to that. Was a really fun alt history experiment for me in terms of like how I can develop a setting that feels like me, but it also feels like it could be, uniquely customizable to whatever play group and what kind of experience you want to have within that. It is heavy metal. It is occult. It is weird and gonzo. It has cicada people. Like there's all this fun stuff that you would expect from anything that I make in terms of like tone and language and imagery that I like to use. But darts was sort of this crossover. The idea that, this storyline takes place over 30 or 40 years and you're just playing this one moment in 2012 felt a little unsatisfying to me, both in terms of the amount of work it would take to manifest and as a player, just knowing like, here's the 30 to 40 years of story that's being left on the table and not being told. And so Darts is this attempt or acknowledgement of this timeline as a living thing, or kind of a fluid historical text, full of stories that hopefully, if you like one, you'd probably like another one. And that's on some level the admission of what I make and what I do. Is it's not for everybody, but if you're into one of them, you're gonna be into the other ones too. So the idea that you can play a different game during the early 90s of the Hell War, where like, the forces, the military is like in full effect. You can play a game in the early 80s about playing records backwards and summoning the devil that way, and like communing with dark forces in the way that your parents were worried that you might have been playing Dungeons and Dragons. And then now in this weird technological retro future of 2012, having a cyberpunk experience that is more in line with our lived experience of technology failing to meet its promise, rather than this sort of technological utopia that a lot of cyberpunk games take for granted. And that's just a bullet list of some of the ideas that could take place over this time span. But with Darts, I can come back to it at any time, have already some sort of foundational understanding of the setting because it's based on this history that I've written out in my head and in some of the books. And so not be starting from point zero, but start from chapter 2 and still create engaging, unique experiences for players to engage with in whatever thing that they're into. So, having the tactical, more combat focused Hell War versus the almost like survival adventure exploration game of Cyber Metal, having story games like I had a game just called Panic that was like early Satanic Panic record collecting. And so it allows me to spread my wings, so to speak, in these different styles of gameplay while still scratching this itch of an aesthetic and an established history.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's such a cool setting. It's also we there's no easy way to describe it. Go to the funding page, because I think can you late pledge now? Are late pledges open? You can late pledge for it. The rolling tech and the character sheet tech in Cyber Metal are both super excellent. But go read about them, because it'll be easier to understand than us trying to explain them right now. A question that Alfred Valley wants to know in the chat, and I actually even have a guess at this one based on some previous conversations. I'm gonna type it in now, and then I'm gonna hit enter when I ask you the question. But I could be wrong. We'll just see. What's your favorite World Champ Game Co. game that you feel went under the radar? Enter. My answer. Don't read it.
I can't see it. It's interesting because I think there's under the radar in terms of like initial release, I would say would be I'm looking in my inventory closet and like trying to decide. I would say long term under the radar, which is a little, maybe it's just me getting greedy, but Cobwebs is to me one of the best games I've ever made, and it did well on Kickstarter when it was up there a couple years ago. But I don't really often see people talk about it. I did a reprint and I haven't sold like any of the reprint. And it's a conspiracy horror for fans of like fiction podcasts like Limetown or Alice is Missing or Alice Isn't Dead. I did that all the time.
Alice is Missing, the podcast that we could make based on that game. Yeah.
But the idea that you're looking for someone who's missing, and in looking, you kind of fall down the web of this conspiracy and you approach danger the more you learn. I think it's an excellent story game. I absolutely love playing it. And besides the Kickstarter, it's kind of fizzled in a way that disappoints me a little bit, but I know that that's like probably my best solo game or best game that I made on my own. So I have immense pride in that. The other game that, and I just published Roll for Clues. I might as well plug it. It's a scratch off game.
We're gonna give away some free copies of Roll for we're gonna give away some copies of Roll for Clues next week. You and I will chat about that afterwards. But yeah,
a very rules light conspiracy horror that is evocative of Cobwebs, but much lighter, obviously, and it has procedurally generated mysteries on the front under like a scratch off, like you would a lottery ticket. Yeah, well, I'm curious what you thought.
That wasn't my guess. This was my guess right here.
Butterfly is definitely, but so Butterfly and Sink to Swim, which are both thematically really close, were games that I really loved that felt almost like I had to make them. And because they're in some way both very biographical and they exist at a particular moment in my life. And both of them commercially were the biggest failure games I've ever made. In terms of like, they went to my patrons who don't get to choose what I make, and almost no one else. So Butterfly is a game about building a sculpture garden in like reverence for someone who you care about, and in building the garden out of dominoes or Jenga pieces or any kind of like bricks, you kind of explore again these memories that you have of this person and how warped by your perspective they could be, or how reality or time kind of changes your perception of your own memory. And Sink to Swim was very similar in terms of, it's about an artist who's got, kind of on their last legs in terms of art as a career, and they don't want to give up, but they feel like they have to create. And it's this dissonance of being a creator under capitalism and having to monetize your art and the things you care about. And they were both zine games. They were both very aesthetically pleasing, but they were also both like time capsules for me emotionally in terms of my own art and living situations. And they in that way, I'm not disappointed with either one of them because they were so meaningful to me, and I'm glad that literally anyone read them or felt they were meaningful to them. But they were never designed for greater consumption in the way that something like Cobwebs feels like a bummer, because it was specifically designed for everyone to rage in these conspiracy stories. And like, I kind of didn't really expect anyone to play Butterfly, even though I wrote it and published it as a game, just because I needed to make that in that moment.
I think Butterfly for me is for anybody who is a creator of any kind, is such a great game, even if they don't play it, to read, to like experience the themes from your perspective that you're going through as you do that. I think it's a great game to play also too.
Thank you.
But I know that I've heard a number of creators, Kirby, who we had on a little while ago, Disaster Tourism on the internet, who was in the chat earlier, may still be. It's like one of the most influential games for him. And so like, I think it is again, I just would encourage people like, and it's one of the ones I know you had, I think at one point mentioned, like, was like, this is such an important personal game to me. And so I would encourage people, because I'm sure it's still in stock, go check it out on your website. And so Aurora also was super good. I think that's the first, I think I became a patron of yours when you were putting Aurora out. I think that's when I shifted over to giving you all the regular money, because I desperately wanted it. It was such an important game for that point in human existence also too. But such a beautiful concept. There's so many great games. Again, if y'all have questions, let us know. We're about to finish up. But again, people can go to dying.day. The campaign is going well as far as overall funding goes. Obviously things can always, you can always, when you're having to live in a capitalist society, get more money. Anything else that you have planned for this campaign or that you're excited about for Soul Burner specifically?
I'm excited to make it really. And I'm working with a great artist named Matt Oberski, who's in my city. Like, we hang out, and that's really cool. Mostly because I'm still doing cyber metal, and I'm doing cyber metal very singularly, doing the art and layout and writing and everything. And Will Yobst edited and is doing a great job still, like on my team there, but it really is again like a very me project. So with Soulburner, having another artist collaborator is an amazing experience and a really cool kind of invigorating thing for me, because I do the art for most of my games, and in addition to taking the weight off of me, it does bring that collaborative nature back into publishing that I'm sometimes missing. And definitely on that aspect of game design, I don't often get to collaborate in the sort of post design of the visuals, because it's something that I can handle. But Matto's doing such a cool job with that. I'm also just excited to see what people do with it in terms of how they play it. Is it a standalone truly? Is it better when it's mixed and mashed and put in these other settings and stuff? That's exciting to me. I don't necessarily see that as a failure of design or text. I think that's a boon to show its accessibility and its diversity. But I'm really excited to see, hopefully people draw their messed up ashen corpses. I would really love to see just like how you picture this memory manifesting in your body. I think, the thing about Soulburner that excites me the most is, again, that full circle, that getting the feedback, that seeing people play it and having unique experiences, and that validation that comes from that, and seeing a collaborative play experience that I'm not actively part of.
Yeah. No, it's again, like all your stuff, it's such a great project. Can't wait to physically get it in hand. I think you are somebody who also, I think, thinks tremendously well about the final product that people receive. Everything that you produce over delivers on the expectations that I have for it, which are pretty high because everything you do does it. But you constantly find great ways to kind of take things up to another level and make absolutely gorgeous things. And so I'm very excited to see where Soulburner goes, what people do with it also too. I should next time we do a stream, grab the class and just pop it in as my character for that one. Next time we do a Morkborg thing,
that would be rad.
We can get a little sample and taste of that. So I'll hit you up about making sure I have that information, because I usually just hit Scumbirther and I'm always like, this is fine. It's fine. But I love it when I get to throw something different and weird into there, because Morkborg does that so well. And the vibes on this are the most Merkborgy thing that I think has ever come out of a non Stockholm cartel designer. And so if you're fans of Merkborg, I think you absolutely need to go pick this game up and check it out for yourself. But also, if you're just fans of good games, go do the same thing. Scumbirther for the win every time, but I also like doing things that are not on Scumbirther. Like we played with Johan recently. We played an adventure by Brian Cullen, and Johan just brought in a class that isn't on Scumbirther and played it, and it was great. It was great to see something totally different in the setting. So I love seeing people drop this kind of stuff in. I'm also interested in what is it like to translate characters between compatible systems, and seeing what weird things happen to them as they go through that process. So being able to put somebody into, like, the ability to now connect a Necronautus character to Morkborg, which then is D20 compatible, so then out to other systems, is a super fun and weird space to think about and play around in. And I also can't wait for those weird amalgam characters
for opening those doors to everybody.
And so that's going to be a jam in the future, just like characters that started in one system and you took through as many systems as possible. And here we've posted the starting and final versions online for everybody to just see the horror of. And so what's the best place to find you online besides going to dying.day to back the campaign?
Yeah, worldchamp.io is my website where you'll find my store that has everything in print. You'll find all the links to my socials, like WC Game Co. on Twitter and World Champ Game Co. on Instagram. I'm on Patreon at World Champ Game Co. And that's where you can get these monthly weird games that are more experimental and frankly a real steal. And worldchampgameco.itch.io is where all my digital stuff lives.
Awesome. I'm super excited about it. Also, if you've been following any of our work on Through the Void, Adam is going to be one of the people who's going to ink some future space nautical inspired tattoos for us at some point in time. So I'm very excited when we finally get to collaborate on that once I'm way further along in the project, but I'm super looking forward to it. Everything Adam does is great. Again, I'm a patron. I have been for a while. I'm so grateful for not only Adam's design work, but also the community building that happens in, on, and through the Brain Trust community, as well as for him and Will doing public design on a regular basis in a way that really inspires me to think about cool concepts and wish I had come up with some of them. I can't wait to see whatever comes out next from you. But it's also, I know that day we were all like, we have too many projects going on, so it's okay to just finish some of the things first, and then we can do more later. Also,
I don't know how to do
that. This has been Prestige Class with Adam Vass, and until next time, class is dismissed. Bye, everybody.